In May 2002, two Utah white power prison gangs, the Soldiers of Aryan Culture and Silent Aryan Warriors, allegedly had plans to attack the Winter Olympics and target athletes with pipe bombs. KSL reports that the gang task force remarked their violence and influence had, quote, no limit. Months later, and likely in response to the discovery of their plot to target Jewish athletes, their general, Scott Biswell, was shot at this hotel in Provo. The details of this killing remain suspicious. 2 months after the shooting, Deseret News provided more information. Although the police never characterized the raid as a counterterrorism operation, in light of the gang's cooperation to target the Olympics, it very well could have been. The general order of events leading to the shooting seemed to have gone something like this. Biswell's brother drove Scott and his girlfriend, Courtney Grimm, to the Amenity Inn, where supposedly he was threatened by Scott Biswell with a gun. An unnamed police informant claims that Scott remarked it was filled with cop-killer bullets and that he wouldn't be taken alive. Now at this time, Scott had a few outstanding warrants for joyriding, assault, theft, criminal mischief, and now police were aware that he had a gun. His girlfriend Courtney was unarmed, but the judge found that both the informant and Scott's brother warned her that there could be violence, and yet she continued to stay by his side. And so in the early morning hours, two SWAT team officers kicked the door to the hotel room in and shot Biswell 9 times. Witnesses say police never gave a verbal warning. Deseret News claims there is an audio-video recording where a warning is given. One of these shots passed through Biswell's thigh and struck Courtney in the abdomen, collapsing her lung and killing her. Police claimed that Biswell had barricaded the door and pulled a gun on them, forcing them to shoot. The following year, a dozen members of the SAC were indicted in a RICO investigation, landing them as long as 20 years in federal prison. And so from mid-2002 to late 2003, the SAC seems to have turned from a terrorist organization operating in the Utah Valley to more or less a prison gang operating almost exclusively behind bars. Although this would change for a short time in 2007 when there was another police shootout elsewhere in Utah Valley. Darren Gruber was shot by police in 2007. Even before the death of the SAC's 2002 leader, Scott Biswell, the gang was shifting towards operating within prison. Their officers were generally in the streets and would communicate orders to those behind bars. In October 2001, presumably while the SAC was still under Biswell's leadership, Darren's son, Darren Jr., murdered a man to try to win initiation into the SAC-adjacent gang, Silent Aryan Warriors. Saw and SAC don't allow members to get tattoos unless they're initiated behind bars. To win a trip to jail, he accompanied 5 SAW members to punish 36-year-old Don Dorton, whom the gang believed stole an ounce of meth. He was beaten, wrapped in a sheet, bound, and driven to a remote stretch of Utah County. Darren Jr. picked up an 87-pound rock and dropped it on Dorton's head, killing him. The Southern Poverty Law Center called it killing for the sake of a patch. 2007, his father was likewise killed. Aside from the 2002 Scott Biswell shooting, this was the highest profile incident involved with these groups. Darren had been in and out of jail since the early 1980s, and he was considered highly dangerous as police responded to enforce a warrant at Spring Hill Apartments. Nearly a dozen cops were on the scene, although Darren wasn't there at the time. It was 04:30 and the cops were searching for drugs and guns. It seems that at some point enforcing their warrant, while Darren wasn't there, someone else walked up to the apartment that they had a warrant to search and was arrested for drug possession, so they knew that Darren was on his way. And soon police got word he was heading in. They boxed his car in and Darren tried to flee, hitting a detective's car, backing into a tree, hitting a civilian vehicle, and then ramming forward and hitting 2 cop cars. Much like Scott Biswell, Gruber had a woman with him, although this time officers hesitated to fire, but once they got a clear shot, they fired multiple shots that would have been fatal. And since these shootouts, most incidents of violence attributed to SAC and SAW have happened inside of prison.
Thurgood and 2 men identified as Anthony Williams and Tarek Goikachia walk into a cell. 6 minutes later, Williams and Goikachia walk out and then back in. Williams drags Thurgood out of the cell. Then Goikachia drags him. Thurgood is beaten and allegedly stabbed 52 times. Less than a minute later, as officers arrive, Williams and Goycochea give each other props.
In 2014, Macon Openshaw pled guilty to firing 3 shots at the Salt Lake Synagogue in 2012. 1 year later, his brother Zane shot at a police car, narrowly missing the cop. He was given 3 years in jail. The founder of the Soldiers of Aryan Culture was released in early 2021, and by late 2021, a federal investigation arrested 21 members of SAC and SAW for trafficking weapons, heroin, and meth, showing that the gang's outside activities might be on the rise.
This case demonstrates their potential for violence and their willingness to provide narcotics and dangerous weapons to the streets of all the cities across the Wasatch Front.
This large coordinated investigation started back in June of 2019. Since that time, investigators say they purchased more than 1.5 pounds of meth and recovered 15 guns. Initial court appearances for these defendants are planned in the coming weeks on these new federal charges.